The echo of polished shoes on marble followed Ethan Walker as he crossed the lobby, each step sounding louder than it should have. Morning traffic hummed beyond the glass doors, a distant reminder that the world was already moving on without him. His tie hung crooked at his collar. The thin folder in his hand, his resume, now useless, was bent from how tightly he'd been gripping it. His palms still carried the faint smell of disinfectant from the night shift he'd worked just hours earlier. He didn't look back. Executives flowed past him in tailored suits, talking into phones, laughing softly. None of them saw him. To them, he was just the janitor who had dared to sit in the wrong chair upstairs and failed. Ethan reached the center of the lobby when a voice cut through the noise, clear, firm, impossible to ignore. "Sir, Ethan Walker. Please stop." The entire space seemed to hold its breath. Security froze. Conversations died mid-sentence. Slowly, Ethan turned. Standing near the entrance was the most powerful woman in the building, the billionaire CEO herself, her gaze fixed on him like she had been waiting for this exact moment. Ethan's heart slammed against his ribs. He had no idea if he was about to be thrown out or if something far worse was coming. Ethan Walker's life didn't run on ambition anymore. It ran on alarms set too early, coffee brewed too weak, and the quiet promise he made every morning to an 8-year-old girl who trusted him with her whole world. Maple Crossing was the kind of town that looked peaceful from the outside. Tree-lined streets, modest houses, schools where teachers knew your child's name. But peace didn't pay bills, and it didn't forgive mistakes. Ethan knew that better than most. He worked overnight because it was the only way to be there when his daughter needed him. While other parents slept, Ethan pushed a cleaning cart through empty hallways, scrubbing floors that would shine under someone else's shoes by morning. He learned the rhythm of silence, the way buildings sounded when no one important was around. At 4 in the morning, the world belonged to people like him, quiet, exhausted, invisible. By the time the sun rose, he was already home, changing out of work clothes before Mia woke up. He never wanted her to smell the chemicals or see how tired he really was. She didn't complain, but she noticed everything. She always did. Mia Walker was small for her age, with eyes that looked like they were always thinking one step ahead. She folded her clothes without being asked. She said she liked her shoes this way, even when the soles were thinning. When the phone rang and Ethan didn't answer, she turned the television volume up just enough to pretend she hadn't heard the voicemail tone that followed. Breakfast was usually cereal, the cheap kind. Ethan measured it carefully, pretending it was about portion control and not about stretching the box another week. Mia ate slowly, listening to him talk about school like nothing else in the world mattered. Sometimes she nodded. Sometimes she smiled. Sometimes she watched his face like she was checking to make sure he was still holding together. The inhaler sat on the counter beside the fridge, always in the same spot. Ethan checked it every morning. He knew exactly how many doses were left. He also knew how much the refill cost without proper insurance. That number lived in his chest like a weight, pressing down harder every time Mia coughed. After his wife died, life didn't fall apart all at once. It cracked quietly. A missed day of work here, a medical bill there. Then came the paperwork, forms he didn't understand at first. Questions about stability, about income, about whether he could adequately provide. The custody documents were still in a drawer in the bedroom. He didn't open it often, but he knew they were there. A reminder that love alone wasn't always enough in the eyes of the world. Mia's maternal grandparents hadn't been cruel. They'd been worried. That almost hurt more. Ethan didn't blame anyone. He blamed himself. Most days, he moved through life carefully, like someone carrying something fragile that could shatter if he stumbled. He didn't take risks. He didn't dream out loud. He focused on getting through the next hour, then the next. But the interview changed that. When he saw the job posting inside the building he cleaned every night, something dangerous stirred in him. Hope. The position offered daytime hours, health insurance, a salary that meant he wouldn't have to count inhaler doses like coins. He hadn't applied because he wanted a title. He applied because he wanted to stop flinching every time the phone rang. Because he wanted to sleep at night instead of working through it. Because he wanted Mia to grow up without learning the language of sacrifice before she learned the language of childhood. The night before the interview, Ethan barely slept. He ironed his borrowed suit until the creases were sharp enough to cut doubt. He practiced answers in the bathroom mirror, not trying to sound impressive, just honest. He knew how to talk to people. He'd spent years calming angry guests, solving problems quietly, taking responsibility even when things weren't his fault. That had to count for something. It had to. When the interview ended and he walked back into the lobby with his resume still in hand, the truth hit him hard. They hadn't looked at him the way people look at someone they're considering. They looked at him the way people look at a boundary they don't plan to cross. Still, he held it together. He always did. Because at the end of the day, losing that interview didn't just mean staying a janitor. It meant staying one emergency away from disaster. It meant another year of explaining, "Not right now," to a child who never asked for much. It meant proving again that he was enough in a world that kept asking for more. Ethan didn't need to win. He needed to survive. And more than that, he needed to keep his daughter safe. Victoria Hale's mornings began before sunrise, not because she wanted them to, but because the weight of running a billion-dollar company didn't wait for coffee. By the time most of Maple Crossing was waking up, she was already in motion, reviewing reports on a tablet, listening to updates through an earpiece, answering questions only she was allowed to answer. Every decision she made rippled outward, touching thousands of lives she would never meet. Hale Consolidated hadn't been built by accident. Victoria had clawed it into existence through years of long nights, sharper instincts, and an almost dangerous belief in systems, processes, structures. She trusted them because she had to. Fairness, to her, meant consistency. If the rules applied to everyone, then justice would take care of itself. Or, at least, that's what she told herself. This particular morning was already tightening around her. A major partnership review loomed, one that could either secure the company's future expansion or stall it for years. The board wanted certainty. Investors wanted reassurance. Everyone wanted answers, and they all wanted them from Victoria. She adjusted the cuff of her blazer as she entered her private office, glass walls overlooking the same lobby Ethan Walker had just walked through. Down there, people moved like pieces on a board, efficient, focused, replaceable. She didn't think of them that way intentionally, but distance had a way of simplifying human beings into functions. On her screen, a quiet internal audit was running in the background. Victoria had ordered it herself weeks earlier, curious whether the company she built still reflected the values she believed in. Part of that audit included observing recruitment interviews, silently, without interference. She wanted to see the machine work when it didn't know it was being watched. One interview window caught her attention: Ethan Walker. The camera showed a modest conference room, clean lines, neutral walls, a long table polished to a dull shine. On one side sat Grant Holloway, head of human resources, posture perfect, expression carefully neutral. Beside him, another manager flipped through printed notes. Across from them sat Ethan, hands folded, shoulders straight, borrowed suit just a little too stiff. Victoria muted the rest of her calls. At first, the interview was unremarkable. Ethan spoke clearly. He didn't overreach. He answered questions the way someone does when they've actually lived the work instead of memorizing answers. When he talked about customer service, his tone changed, not louder, just steadier. He described handling conflict, calming people down, taking responsibility when situations escalated. He didn't use buzzwords, he used examples. Grant nodded politely. The other manager smiled once or twice. Everything looked normal. Then came the question that shifted the air. "And your current position here at Hale Consolidated?" Grant asked. Ethan hesitated for a fraction of a second, not because he was ashamed, but because he knew what the answer often did to people. Still, he told the truth. "I work overnight. Facilities, janitorial." Victoria watched the room change. It wasn't dramatic. No one scoffed. No one said anything outright cruel. But the smiles thinned. Pens paused. The questions that followed lost their warmth. They became narrower, colder. Suddenly, the conversation wasn't about experience. It was about credentials. "Do you have a degree? How familiar are you with corporate presentation standards? Do you think you can adapt to the company's professional image?" Victoria leaned back slightly in her chair. Words like image and culture fit drifted through the room, vague enough to sound reasonable, sharp enough to cut. Ethan answered calmly. He explained his background. He didn't defend himself. He didn't apologize. He spoke the way someone does when they believe their work should speak for itself. Grant listened, but Victoria could see it. His decision had already been made. Not because Ethan lacked ability, but because he didn't match the picture Grant carried in his head of who belonged at the front desk. The interview wrapped up quickly after that. "Thank you for your time," Grant said, already gathering his papers. Ethan stood. He thanked them back. He shook hands. His posture never slumped, even as the opportunity quietly slipped away. The screen switched to the next interview automatically. Victoria didn't. She sat there longer than she meant to, staring at the empty chair Ethan had just left. She told herself this was exactly why systems existed: to filter, to standardize, to protect the company from inconsistency. Grant had followed procedure. Nothing improper had happened. Still, something about it didn't sit right. Victoria had spent years fighting to be taken seriously in rooms where she didn't fit the image either. She remembered what it felt like to be evaluated on appearance before competence, on background before character. Somewhere along the way, she'd trusted the system enough to forget that it was built by people, and people carry bias even when they didn't mean to. She checked the audit logs and flagged the interview for review. Not to overturn it, not yet. Just to understand why a man with calm confidence, real experience, and nothing to hide had walked out of that room looking like someone who already knew the answer before the question was finished. Down in the lobby, Victoria could see movement through the glass. A man in a crooked tie, walking toward the doors, résumé still in hand. For the first time that morning, she closed her tablet and paid attention. The first time Victoria Hale noticed Ethan Walker, she hadn't known his name. It had been weeks earlier, on a morning that already felt behind schedule. The lobby was busy in that quiet, expensive way: soft footsteps, low conversations, the faint scent of coffee drifting from somewhere behind the glass walls. Victoria was halfway through a call when movement near the seating area caught her eye. An elderly woman sat stiffly on the edge of a leather chair, one hand gripping her purse, the other pressed flat against her thigh. Her face had gone pale, the color draining so quickly it was impossible not to notice. People passed her without slowing. A security guard was speaking to someone at the desk, distracted. No one realized anything was wrong yet. Except Ethan. He had been mopping nearby, moving carefully around the furniture the way he always did. When he glanced up, he didn't rush, he didn't panic. He simply stopped, set the mop aside, and walked over to the woman as if this was exactly where he needed to be. "Ma'am," he said gently, crouching so his voice stayed low, calm. "Are you feeling lightheaded?" The woman nodded once, her lips trembling. She tried to answer but couldn't quite get the words out. Ethan didn't touch her without asking. He didn't raise his voice. He asked simple questions. When she mentioned missing breakfast, Ethan reached into the cleaning cart, pulled out a small packet of hard candy, and placed it carefully in her hand. He helped her sit back, called security, asked for water. He stayed there the entire time, talking softly, grounding her until help arrived. By the time security realized what had happened, the crisis had already passed. Later, Victoria learned the woman was Eleanor Brooks, one of Hale Consolidated's most valuable external partners. The incident never made a report. Ethan didn't file anything. He didn't mention it to anyone. He simply went back to work. That memory resurfaced now as Victoria replayed footage from different angles, searching for confirmation that what she remembered wasn't coincidence. There he was again, Ethan Walker, quiet, composed, doing exactly what needed to be done without an audience. Back in the present, Victoria pulled up the interview recording once more. She watched it differently this time. She noticed how Ethan never interrupted even when questions were loaded, how he listened fully before answering, how his posture stayed open, respectful, steady. There was no performance in him, no hunger for approval. He spoke the way people do when they aren't trying to impress, only to be understood. When asked about handling difficult situations, he didn't exaggerate. He didn't sell himself. He described calming an angry guest by acknowledging frustration instead of challenging it. He talked about solving problems without needing credit, about staying level when emotions ran high. None of it sounded rehearsed. Victoria paused the video on a single frame. Ethan mid-sentence, hands folded loosely on the table. She recognized that look. It was the look of someone who had learned calm the hard way. She cross-checked his employee record. 3 years of overnight work, no complaints. No write-ups. Perfect attendance. He had cleaned executive offices without incident, worked holidays without being asked, stayed late without expectation of reward. The system labeled him support staff, nothing more. But systems didn't measure character. Victoria leaned back in her chair, rubbing her temple. She wasn't ready to call it injustice. Not yet. She knew how dangerous it was to jump to conclusions. Grant Holloway followed protocol. The company had standards. Standards existed for a reason. Still, patterns mattered. Ethan's interview answers weren't weak. They were practical, real. The only moment the energy shifted was when his job title entered the conversation, not his ability, not his experience, just the label. Victoria felt something she hadn't expected, discomfort. She replayed the moment again, the slight tightening of Grant's jaw, the subtle change in tone. No one had said, "You don't belong here." They didn't have to. The message was implied, polished, wrapped in professional language. Image, culture fit. Victoria had heard those words before. She'd heard them when she was younger, when investors questioned whether she looked like a CEO. When they asked who was really behind her success. When they smiled politely and passed her over. She closed the file and stared out at the lobby below. People moved through it constantly, carrying laptops, coffee, purpose. Somewhere in that same space, Ethan Walker had stood without a spotlight, doing the right thing simply because it was the right thing. He hadn't asked to be seen. That mattered. Victoria wasn't convinced yet. She wasn't ready to interfere. But curiosity had replaced indifference, and that alone was dangerous for the system she trusted so deeply. She reopened the audit dashboard and flagged the interview, not as an error, but as a question. Who decided who belonged? And what else had the company quietly been overlooking? By the time the rejection became official, Ethan Walker already knew. He didn't hear it in a meeting or read it in an email. He heard it the way people like him always did, through fragments. A lowered voice near the break room. A sentence that stopped when he turned the corner. His name spoken softly, followed by a pause that said everything. Yeah, the janitor interview guy, HR already closed it. Ethan kept walking, pushing his cart down the hallway like he hadn't heard a thing. His face stayed neutral. His hands didn't shake. He had learned a long time ago how to receive bad news without letting it show. Survival demanded that skill. Later that morning, Grant Holloway finalized the paperwork. One click. One checkbox. Reason for rejection, standard procedure. No malice, no explanation. Just a quiet, permanent no entered into the system. Ethan clocked out and rode the elevator down with 3 men in suits who didn't acknowledge him. The doors opened into the lobby, and the familiar mix of polished stone and filtered sunlight greeted him like it always did. Nothing had changed. And yet everything had. He was halfway across the floor when his phone vibrated. He stopped near a column, glancing down at the screen. Maple Crossing Elementary. His chest tightened. "Mr. Walker," the school nurse said gently when he answered. "Mia's inhaler is almost empty. She's okay right now, but she's been coughing more than usual. We just wanted to let you know." Ethan closed his eyes for a brief second. He thanked her. He hung up. He didn't move. He already knew the refill cost. He knew how long the last one had lasted. He also knew that without proper insurance, every delay turned into a calculation no parent should have to make. As he stepped outside, the late morning air felt colder than it should have. He stood near the doors, watching people pass, wondering how many more overnight shifts he could physically manage. How long before exhaustion caught up to him in a way he couldn't hide from Mia? A second job would mean sleeping less. It would mean seeing her even less, but it might mean keeping her safe. That was the math. By early afternoon, Ethan was back inside, finishing a task he'd agreed to cover for another worker. He moved quietly, the way he always did, when voices drifted toward him from the HR corridor. Grant's voice was unmistakable. "We followed protocol," Grant said, calm and controlled. "He wasn't the right fit." End of story. Someone murmured agreement. Someone else laughed, short and uncomfortable. Ethan didn't slow down. He didn't need to hear more. The system had spoken. What he didn't know, what no one knew yet, was that Victoria Hale had been watching the system fail in real time. From her office, she saw Ethan's employee file close. She saw the rejection logged. She saw Grant's justification, and something in her finally shifted from curiosity to certainty. This wasn't about qualifications. It was about comfort. Victoria stood abruptly, her chair rolling back against the glass wall. She didn't call an assistant. She didn't schedule a meeting. She walked. Down the private elevator, through the executive corridor, into the same lobby Ethan had crossed a dozen times without being seen. Ethan had just reached the center of the floor again, resume folder still in his hand, when her voice rang out. "Sir, Ethan Walker." Please stop. The effect was immediate. Conversations died. Phones lowered. Security stiffened, unsure whether to intervene or stand down. Heads turned in unison, following Victoria Hale as she stepped forward, her heels striking the marble with quiet authority. Ethan turned slowly, his pulse roaring in his ears. "Yes, ma'am," he said, automatically. "Please wait here," Victoria said. Not unkindly, not gently either. "I need a moment." She turned to security. "Have HR come down." "Grant Holloway. Now." The guard hesitated only a second before moving. A ripple spread through the lobby. People pretended not to stare and failed. Whispers followed Victoria's path like static. No one could remember the last time she'd done something like this. Unscheduled, unscripted, public. Ethan stood where he was told, his mind racing. Had he broken a rule? Missed something? He thought of Mia. Of the inhaler. Of the possibility, sudden and terrifying, that this might make things worse. Grant arrived quickly, tie perfectly straight, expression neutral, but eyes sharp with confusion. 2 other managers followed him, pulled from their offices mid-task. They stopped when they saw Ethan standing beside the CEO. "Victoria," Grant said carefully. "Is there an issue?" "There is," Victoria replied. Her voice wasn't raised, but it carried. "And we're going to address it here." She turned slightly so others could hear without having to gather. Employees lingered at the edges, pretending to work while clearly listening. The air felt tight, electric. Ethan Walker interviewed for the front desk support position this morning, Victoria said. Is that correct? Grant nodded. Yes. And the panel determined. Determined what? Victoria interrupted. That he wasn't qualified? Grant adjusted his stance. That he wasn't the right fit for the role. Victoria looked at him steadily. According to which requirement? Grant paused. Just a beat too long. The role represents the company, he said. We have standards. Standards that include a degree? Victoria asked. No, Grant admitted. Standards that exclude internal candidates with relevant experience? No, he said again, more tightly. Victoria nodded once. Then explain to me why a man with years of guest-facing experience, 3 years of flawless internal service, and a proven ability to remain calm under pressure was dismissed in under 20 minutes. The lobby had gone silent. Grant's jaw tightened. It was a judgment call. Victoria looked at Ethan then, not as a symbol, not as an example, but as a person standing alone under a spotlight he never asked for. Ethan, she said, do you feel your interview was judged on your ability to do the job? Ethan swallowed. Every instinct told him to be careful, to be polite, to protect himself. No, ma'am, he said quietly. I don't. A murmur rippled through the room. Victoria turned back to Grant. That's the problem. Careers suddenly felt fragile. Titles felt thinner. The system everyone trusted was being questioned out loud in daylight with witnesses. Ethan stood there, heart pounding, unsure whether this moment would save him or cost him everything. But for the first time since the interview ended, he wasn't invisible, and neither was the truth. Ethan Walker had learned not to expect mercy from moments like this. As Victoria Hale's words hung in the air, he didn't feel relief. He felt the slow, familiar drop in his stomach, the feeling that came right before things went wrong. Public scenes rarely ended well for people in his position. When powerful systems corrected themselves, they usually did it quietly. When they didn't, someone like Ethan paid the price. He stood exactly where she'd told him to stand, hands folded in front of him, eyes forward. Every instinct in his body urged him to apologize for taking up space, to say this was a misunderstanding, to make it easier for everyone else to move on. He didn't. Instead, he did something small and practical. Something only a parent who lived one emergency away from chaos would think to do. He pulled his phone from his pocket and typed a message with careful thumbs. Hi, Mrs. Alvarez. If I'm late today, could you please pick up Mia from school? I'll explain later. Thank you. He stared at the screen for a second before sending it, then slid the phone back into his pocket like it was a confession. Grant Holloway cleared his throat. With respect, he said, turning toward Victoria, we're discussing this in the wrong setting. Personnel decisions aren't meant to be handled in the lobby. Victoria didn't respond immediately. Grant continued, his voice calm, practiced. Mr. Walker is a valued employee in his current role, but front desk support requires a certain presence, a certain polish. We can't risk the company's image for the sake of sentiment. Ethan flinched at the word sentiment. It sounded like pity. He hated that. This isn't personal, Grant added. It's business. Ethan felt the familiar burn behind his eyes. He kept his gaze fixed on the marble floor, tracing faint cracks in the stone with his eyes so he wouldn't look up and show anything he couldn't afford to show. He had done everything right. He had told the truth. He had worked hard. And still, it wasn't enough. Again. Victoria asked a few more questions, each one measured, each answer from Grant smoother than the last. The managers beside him nodded, relieved to hide behind process. Procedure, policy. All the words that made unfair things sound reasonable. Ethan's thoughts drifted despite himself. Mia would be home by now. Sitting at the kitchen table, backpack dropped at her feet, homework spread out neatly. She would glance at the clock every few minutes without realizing she was doing it. She would listen for footsteps in the hallway, the sound of keys, the small signs that meant her dad was close. She always listened. Ethan pictured the inhaler on the counter. How light it felt in his hand this morning. How close it was to being empty. He imagined explaining, gently, that they would have to wait a little longer, that things were just tight right now, that it would be okay even if he wasn't sure it would. His chest tightened. Grant finished speaking and waited, confident the system would protect him like it always had. The silence stretched. Employees nearby pretended not to watch, their attention sharp behind still bodies. Everyone understood what was happening, even if no one said it out loud. Ethan prepared himself. He prepared for the quiet ending. For Victoria to nod, apologize for the inconvenience, and tell him he was free to go. He prepared to return his badge, to clock in tonight like nothing had happened, to work another overnight shift, scrubbing floors that reflected other people's futures. He prepared to tell Mia he was late because of work. Again. A vibration in his pocket startled him. Mrs. Alvarez had replied, "Of course. Mia can stay with us as long as you need. Take care." Ethan closed his eyes for a brief moment, grateful and ashamed all at once. Grateful that someone could step in, ashamed that he needed it. When he opened his eyes, Victoria was still there, still listening, her expression unreadable. Ethan couldn't tell what she was thinking. He couldn't tell if this pause meant hope or simply delay. He shifted his weight slightly, careful not to draw attention. He didn't want to be the reason this became harder for anyone else. He had lived long enough knowing that people like him were often tolerated, not defended. The silence pressed down on him. For a moment, it felt like everything he had fought for since his wife died, every night shift, every skipped meal, every quiet promise to his daughter, was balanced on a thin edge, ready to fall. Ethan didn't ask for fairness. He braced for loss. And somewhere in Maple Crossing, an 8-year-old girl waited at a kitchen table, pencil in hand, listening for footsteps that hadn't come yet, still believing her father would walk through the door, like he always did. The silence in the lobby stretched long enough to make people uncomfortable. Victoria Hale led it. She didn't rush moments like this. She had learned, over years of boardrooms and negotiations, that truth landed harder when people were forced to sit with it. Grant Holloway stood with his hands clasped in front of him, posture rigid, expression carefully controlled. He still believed procedure would save him. It always had before. "Let's be very clear," Victoria said at last, her voice calm but unmistakably firm. "This is not about sentiment. This is about judgment." She turned slightly so her words carried through the open space. Employees lingered nearby, pretending to check phones, straighten papers, adjust bags. No one was leaving. Mr. Walker's interview was flagged during a routine audit, Victoria continued. "One I personally ordered." She looked directly at Grant. "I watched it." Grant's eyes flickered, just once. "I watched the entire interview," Victoria said. "I listened to his answers. I reviewed his work history. And I reviewed the justification for his rejection." She paused, then asked, "Can you tell me again why he was dismissed?" Grant cleared his throat. "As I explained, the decision was based on fit. Front desk support represents the company. We have to consider perception." "Perception of what?" Victoria asked. "Professionalism. Presence," Grant replied. "Clients expect a certain standard." Victoria nodded slowly. "And yet," she said, "the job description does not require a degree. It does not require prior corporate experience. It requires composure, communication, and problem-solving under pressure." She turned toward Ethan. "Mr. Walker," she said, "how many years did you work in guest-facing roles before joining facilities?" 8, Ethan answered quietly. His voice didn't shake. "And during those years," Victoria asked, "were you responsible for de-escalating conflicts?" "Yes." "Handling complaints?" "Yes." "Managing emergencies?" "Yes, ma'am." Victoria turned back to Grant. "So which of those experiences disqualifies him?" Grant opened his mouth, then closed it again. Victoria didn't give him time to recover. "Now," she said, "let's talk about something that never made it into any report." She gestured toward the seating area near the lobby wall. "Several weeks ago, one of our external partners experienced a medical emergency in this building. An elderly woman named Eleanor Brooks." A few heads lifted at the name. She became dizzy, disoriented. "At risk," Victoria continued. "Security was nearby but distracted. Staff passed her without noticing." Victoria's eyes settled on Ethan. One person noticed. The lobby was completely still now. "Mr. Walker recognized the signs," Victoria said. "He stayed calm. He helped her sit. He provided immediate assistance and called for help. He remained with her until the situation was under control." She looked back at Grant. "Do you know why I know this?" Grant swallowed. "Because Eleanor Brooks personally called me later that day," Victoria said. "She wanted to thank the janitor named Ethan who treated her with dignity and care when no one else saw her." A low murmur rippled through the onlookers. "She also happens to be directly connected to one of our most significant partnerships," Victoria added. "A partnership built on trust." Grant's composure cracked. "That incident," Victoria continued, "was not reported by Mr. Walker. He didn't seek recognition. He didn't use it as leverage. He went back to work." Victoria let that sit. "So," she said quietly, "explain to me how a man trusted with the safety of our partners is somehow unfit to represent us at the front desk." Grant's mouth moved, but no words came out. The managers beside him stared at the floor. Victoria stepped forward, closing the distance. "This rejection was not based on standards," she said. "It was based on comfort, on image, on an assumption about who belongs where." She turned to Ethan. "Mr. Walker," she said, her tone shifting, not softer but more direct. "You were not rejected because you lacked ability. You were rejected because the system failed to see you clearly." Ethan felt something give way in his chest. He hadn't realized how tightly he'd been holding himself together until that moment. Victoria faced the group again. "That ends now," she spoke decisively. "Effective immediately, Ethan Walker will be placed into a paid training program for front desk support. He will receive full benefits starting today. Upon successful completion, he will transition into the role permanently." The words echoed. "This is not a favor," Victoria said. "This is not charity. This is a correction." She looked directly at Grant. "And this process," she added, "will be reviewed thoroughly." Grant nodded stiffly, exposed and silent. Victoria turned back to Ethan one final time. "You earned this opportunity long before today," she said. "All we're doing now is acknowledging it." Ethan stood there, the weight of the moment settling over him. He didn't smile. He didn't speak right away. He simply nodded, once, the way someone does when they finally feel seen. Around them, the lobby slowly exhaled. People returned to motion, but something had shifted. The truth had been spoken out loud, and it couldn't be put back. Ethan didn't feel victorious. He felt steady. And for the first time in a long while, the ground beneath him didn't feel like it was about to disappear. The first morning Ethan Walker walked into the building in daylight as a trainee, instead of a night janitor, it felt unfamiliar in a way he couldn't explain. The lobby looked the same: polished floors, glass walls, the quiet rush of people with purpose, but he stood differently in it now, not taller, not prouder, just steadier. He wore a simple suit he'd bought secondhand with his first advance paycheck. It fit better than the borrowed one, not because it was expensive, but because it was his. The badge clipped to his jacket still felt strange against his chest, like something that might disappear if he stopped paying attention to it. Training was structured, demanding, fair. Ethan didn't receive special treatment, and he didn't want it. He sat through long sessions on systems, security procedures, visitor protocols. He took notes the way someone does when they know this chance isn't guaranteed twice. When others complain quietly about the pace, Ethan stayed late, practicing scenarios until his responses felt natural. His mentor, a calm, soft-spoken man named Daniel, noticed immediately. "You've done this kind of work before," Daniel said one afternoon as they watched the front desk from a distance. "Not like this," Ethan replied honestly. Daniel smiled. "Different setting, same skills." Day by day, Ethan proved that was true. He handled tense moments with patience. He remembered names. He listened before speaking. When a delivery was delayed and tempers rose, Ethan didn't escalate. He solved it. When a visitor arrived flustered and late, Ethan grounded them without making them feel small. People began to notice, not because he demanded attention, but because things ran smoother when he was around. At home, the change was quieter but deeper. Ethan stopped counting inhaler doses. The refill sat safely in the medicine cabinet, paid for, no stress attached. When Mia coughed one evening, he reached for it without hesitation, without calculation. That alone made the room feel lighter. Mia noticed the difference before he did. "You're home earlier," she said one afternoon, looking up from the kitchen table where she was coloring. "I am," Ethan said, smiling. "And you're not so tired," she added, studying him carefully. He laughed softly. "Still tired, just a better kind." They ate dinner together more often. Real meals, not rushed. Ethan listened to stories about school he'd missed before. Mia talked about friends, about projects, about nothing at all. She stopped watching the clock. At work, the whispers faded. Curiosity turned into acceptance. Acceptance into respect. No one introduced Ethan as the janitor who moved up. He was just Ethan, a trainee who worked hard, a colleague who helped without keeping score, someone people trusted at the desk. One morning, during a particularly busy rush, the lobby buzzed with overlapping demands. Phones rang. A security alert blinked briefly. A visiting executive grew impatient. Ethan handled it all. Later, Daniel clapped him lightly on the shoulder. "You belong here," he said simply. Ethan nodded, absorbing the words without clinging to them. Belonging wasn't something you demanded. It was something you built. Weeks passed. Training ended. Evaluations came back strong. No fanfare. No announcements. Just a schedule with Ethan's name printed clearly at the front desk. The apartment reflected the shift in small ways. Fresh groceries. A replaced light fixture he'd been meaning to fix for months. Mia's shoes, new ones, lined up neatly by the door. One evening, as Ethan helped Mia with homework, she paused and looked at him. "Dad," she said. "Yeah? You're not scared all the time anymore." The words caught him off guard. He considered them carefully before answering. "I still get scared," he said, "but not like before." She nodded, satisfied. Later that night, as Ethan prepared for bed, he thought about how close everything had come to slipping away, how easily this could have gone differently. He didn't feel victorious. He felt grounded. He hadn't been rescued. He'd been given a fair chance, and he had carried it the rest of the way himself. The next morning, as he took his place behind the front desk, sunlight pouring in through the glass, Ethan stood ready, not as a symbol, not as a story, just as a father who showed up. And that, finally, was enough. The apartment was quiet in the way Ethan Walker liked best, not empty, just calm. The hum of the refrigerator, the soft scratch of pencil on paper. Outside, the streetlights cast a gentle glow through the window, steady and unhurried. Mia sat at the kitchen table, feet tucked under the chair, homework spread neatly in front of her. Ethan leaned over her shoulder, pointing at a line on the page. "Slow down," he said softly. "You already know this." She smiled without looking up. "I just want to finish before it gets too late." Ethan nodded, feeling the weight of that sentence more than she knew. Late used to mean worry. Late used to mean waiting. Tonight, it just meant bedtime coming soon. They talked about small things, what she wanted for lunch tomorrow, a spelling test later in the week, whether they should make pancakes in the morning or save them for the weekend. Ordinary plans, safe plans. When Mia finished, Ethan checked her inhaler out of habit. Full. Where it should be. He placed it back in the cabinet without the familiar tightening in his chest. No counting, no mental math. Just certainty. Later, as he tucked her into bed, Mia reached for his hand. "You're home more now," she said sleepily. "I am," he replied. She yawned. "I like it." Ethan brushed her hair back gently. "Me too." After she drifted off, he stood in the doorway for a moment, listening to her breathe. Even. Untroubled. The sound settled something deep inside him. He moved through the apartment, turning off lights, straightening a chair, pausing by the window. Tomorrow, he would go to work in the morning. He would stand behind a desk instead of a mop. But the truth was, he hadn't changed. He was still the same father who showed up, the same man who stayed calm when things went wrong, the same person who did what needed to be done, even when no one was watching. He hadn't needed saving. He had needed to be seen. Ethan turned out the last light and headed to bed, knowing tomorrow would bring challenges of its own, but also knowing they would face them together. And if this story touched you, subscribe to Just Dad Things for more single dad stories, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from.